Thanks, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone to the SUNY Spectrum pre-conference session. My name is Morgan Clifford. I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a staff associate with SUNY's Got Your Back. I am very excited to welcome everyone to this session featuring the Sustainable Development Goals Academy, which is an initiative of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We acknowledge that these are challenging times, and we are all trying to figure out how to adapt to working, learning, and teaching in an online world, while many of us are also facing increasingly tight budgets and limited resources. So today's session introduces a program that is not only leading in the space of online education, but also offers their resources at absolutely no cost. The Sdg Academy offers free online courses on a wide range of topics related to sustainable development and are all taught by experts around the world. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers, Shannon Kobran and Meredith Storey, who are both education managers with Sdg Academy. I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to the SUNY Spectrum Conference for having us. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Shannon Kobran. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. And as Morgan said, I'm an education manager with the Sdg Academy. Here, let me share my screen. We can get started.
As Shannon shares, my name is Meredith Storey. I am also an education manager with the Sdg Academy, and I use pronouns she, her, hers. We're just joining you today to go through some of our online content that's freely available. Some of this might be geared more towards a classroom setting in formalized education, so we're really taking a tuned look today at how you can use this to inform your own experiences in your own education.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about who we are. Just before we dive in, we also want to just kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about today, and how we hope that the framework of the SDGs, which we'll introduce in a minute, and some of the resources that we have available can be useful to you in your teaching and your learning about how we make a better world for everyone, and how, in particular, the framework of the SDGs and the resources that we're offering today can be useful to you in your work on sexual and interpersonal violence, which is a difficult topic that we hope we'll be able to help with.
Absolutely. So to begin with the agenda and the session objectives, first the brief welcome here, an introduction to us, etc. The session objectives I'll cover shortly. A brief introduction to sustainable development, and just bearing in mind that this is such a wide-ranging, over-encompassing kind of subject that touches on so many different things. So we'll do an introduction to sustainable development, as well as to the SDGs in particular. An introduction to the Sdg Academy and our work. Ideas for how to use the Sdg Academy resources in your own network, and also a little kind of sneak peek at what those resources exactly are and how you might begin to think about them and conceptualize them for your own work. Opportunities for student engagement, both with the Sdg Academy and externally, ways to network, ways to collaborate, things like that. And then we'll move into a more interactive portion. We'll have a short Q&A, and then we hope to have a more engaging discussion before doing a final Q&A and a closing statement. So to begin with the objectives, understanding the SDGs and the origins of Agenda 2030 through the history and practice of these goals. Understanding the Sdg Academy as the educational resources available through our many diverse learning platforms. We'll go through a few of these platforms specifically in order to highlight examples there. Identify steps you can take to improve your understanding of sustainable development through the Academy and beyond. Again, there's a number of great ways to get involved. And articulating how the SDG framework and the resources of the Sdg Academy can be useful in your own work, in your own activism, in your own network. Just the tools that we give today are that they're tools and they're active platforms that can be used. But it's used to inform what you already believe in your own activism already. So we hope that these can just become useful tools for you.
So we've been saying a lot of words that you may or may not be familiar with: sustainable development, SDGs, Agenda 2030. So Meredith's going to walk us through a little bit about what those all are if you're not familiar.
And I know that Elizabeth and Morgan both have their eye on the chat too, and the questions and answers rather. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and fire them through. My own PhD is on sustainable development and the rhetoric between students and business professionals and how we all need to coalesce around sustainably driven goals and mindsets. So if it does go on a tangent that you just have a lot of questions, please just fire those away and we can answer them as best we can live as well. So sustainable development, to begin, the fundamental understanding of what this concept is, because it's quite massive. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this comes to us from the Brundtland Report, 1987's Our Common Future. And what this is it's really taking the first fundamental definition of sustainable development, because it had been used since, I think, 1972 is when sustainable development was first coined as a term. But it was really thrown around as like highfalutin UN language for we do want to make a better future, but what does that mean? And really the most basic level, we want to improve life for future generations and those to come, not degrading environmental resources, social resources, economic resources, but without going into those specific pigeonholes, just to realize all of this is encompassing and all of these subjects need to be addressed in order to create a better future. So what are the SDGs and what is sustainable development? So over time, the sustainable development agenda and narrative has really changed. So at first, it was very socially driven. It was about people. It was about equal rights and trying to create opportunities and trying to create equal opportunities. But as from 72, when it was first coined, it took on more of a social, then more of an environmental, then more of a social kind of struggle between how you can truly define these far-reaching terms. So with the Earth Summit and with Rio, all the different conferences that came forward where the declarations of human rights, declarations of environmental security and stability, things that were pronounced very finely into the sustainable development agenda have been articulated quite strongly within the last 5 years. This is quite a time to be talking about sustainable development. But the rich history that informs it from the Millennium Development Goals that were the dominant narrative of the UN and of the world from 2000 to 2015 were very focused on social dimensions of sustainability. So one problem there is that it's very focused on kind of outputs. How is sustainable development affecting people? And if you're doing that, then you're not really addressing the root causes of how people are affecting sustainability and how environmental degradation is going to hurt poverty, is going to hurt equality, is going to hurt the economy, all of these things in the long run. So sustainable development is really, truly a comprehensive and interdisciplinary field that deals with the intersection between economic development, social justice, and environmental sustainability. And in your formal education and watching the news, all of these things, you've probably seen a lot to do with economic, social, and environmental. You could see this in the way businesses now communicate over Twitter or in their annual reports, the way that it's not just about the bottom line anymore. It's not just about economic development. There are core subject matters and core issues that are now being framed. It's also, if you've ever heard of the triple bottom line and things like that, people, planet, profit, there's just a number of ways that these subjects can be widely framed. In 2015, the 193 member states of the UN adopted the 17 goals and 169 targets that are affiliated with the modern Sustainable Development Agenda, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the goals themselves are, there are 17 principles that touch on economic prosperity, social inclusion, environmental security, and these changes over time. You can see them outlined here as really a framework. And it's so important to identify. The Millennium Development Goals were really the dominant agenda from 2000 to 2015. But all of the skepticism around how they captured the social elements of sustainability really led to their own extinction. They were not a far-reaching network. They were not brought by the people for the people. They were agreed upon, ratified, and then they existed. The modern Sustainable Development Goals, this agenda here, is from the people. It was created with working groups, with you could even go on the Sustainable Development platform and write in your own responses for what you think is most important to achieve by 2030. It's so much more encompassing, and that's a great strength. but it's also probably the greatest criticism is that it is so wide-reaching. So while there are 17 goals, 169 targets, that's so much that needs to be covered in a very short amount of time. Now we only have 10 years, and to watch the news these days, especially in 2020, to see how we are or are not progressing towards these issues is really a point of concern for the future, but one that we hope to address through educational quality of materials and progressing these dialogues. So the SDGs themselves, they really cover a large number of subjects. So there's not much that the SDGs aren't related to. Again, a strength, but also a bit of a criticism. You can see this in international relations, macroeconomics, public health, just about any formal subject you could study in school or read about has some sort of implication for sustainable development, whether it's this formal agenda or whether it's the agenda and how it's changed over time. The SDGs are quite a lot stronger than the MDGs were because of their measurability. So one thing, we know that we can teach towards these subjects that have been presented here. We know that there are certain measurable deliverables that carbon needs to reach, that targets for environmental outputs by the end of this year, by the end of 2030, by the end of 2050. The 2030 agenda is really measurable and really pointed. So there are great things that have come out of the SDGs, and one of which is really the educational push that has been driving change.
Before we jump into sort of our next section, I also want to emphasize that in addition to being super interdisciplinary, interconnected, one of the sort of new things that came into the development sphere with the Sustainable Development Goals, as opposed to previous international development agendas like the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, was that previously development had been seen as something for poor countries. They needed to develop, and it was focused on eradicating poverty, increasing access to healthcare, eradicating diseases, improving maternal mortality rates, things like that. But it wasn't a comprehensive global re-envisioning a framework for the entire world. It was really, well, how can we help poor countries? And what the SDGs have done in 2015 and then looking forward to 2030 and beyond is really say, no, these are problems that everyone needs to face. There are development, economic development issues of inequality between countries. Yes, there are poor countries and there are rich countries, but within countries, we see certainly lots of inequality. We've all seen it between different demographics, or the gaps between the rich and poor keep getting bigger. That not everyone has access to healthcare. Not everyone has a good paying job. There's not gender equality. Even within countries that are considered to be better on those topics. So it was really looking at how do we as a world move forward, and how do we do that by looking at the intersection between social justice and social inclusion, the traditional economic development, and then also these environmental sustainability factors that we can't keep growing and using our resources and polluting the planet and still expect to all be okay at the end. So that was kind of the revelation of the SDGs. Also, as Meredith mentioned, the fact that they were created through this coalition of governments, UN officials, but also a lot of civil society groups, individuals, like Meredith said, could go on and comment on the development of the SDGs. I think when the idea for a new round of global goals was coming up, there was the original list was like 100 or something goals long. And of course, it's hard to find a place to put everything, but I think that's why it all got smushed into 17 goals, each equally important. They're not ranked in any way, but sort of categorizing all the different issues that people wanted to address under goals. So that's a big strength, as Meredith said, that they are measurable. There are targets, there are indicators, there's a reporting system for countries to report on how well they're doing. It's all about having robust data, and that's something that different countries have been developing, all their different reporting mechanisms so that they know where they stand. That can also be a weakness because you had to get 193 countries with lots of different cultures, lots of different priorities to agree to a set of goals. So it's a really remarkable feat that 193 countries who can never agree on anything agreed to all undertake these goals. But that does mean that sometimes specific issues got left out. And so I wanted to be upfront about that, the fact that, for instance, the LGBTQI+ community is not explicitly mentioned in the SDGs. However, going into that, so the issues that you're all here to deal with in this conference about sexual and interpersonal violence definitely come up in the SDGs, and like Meredith said, it's a really interdisciplinary framework. You can, if you are used to working in interdisciplinary methods, and I come from a liberal arts background, I love it because I feel like everything relates to everything and I can find an argument for everything. So I do feel like there's absolutely a place for these conversations within the SDG framework that can be informed by the SDGs. But I just wanted to go into a couple places where these issues are touched upon very explicitly, and then also maybe a couple things that people are saying about them. So for instance, sexual and interpersonal violence is explicitly referred to in a couple of different SDG targets. So SDG 5 is the SDG on gender equality, which does call for gender parity, but it tends to, some of the criticism is it tends to reinforce the gender binary, and that there is more that can be done to re-envision and reinvent what we mean by gender equality in the framework of the SDGs, and make sure that populations who don't fit into the binary are still counted and are still recognized and are still being helped within the framework of the SDGs. So you'll see elimination of all forms of violence against girls and women. It's a little specific. Elimination of harmful practices, reduce violence and death, and abuse and exploitation. So those are all specific targets that deal with these topics. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has created this I liked this framework here for thinking about the ecosystem of violence and how all of the different aspects of the SDGs, poverty and health, and lack of opportunity, can contribute to violence and the situations that arise that make violence occur. So this is their ecosystem model relating to different SDGs and the risk factors associated with violence, sexual and interpersonal violence. And I'd be happy to share this link if anyone is interested in this framework that the WHO has created. And like I said, specifically with the LGBTQI+ community, there has been a lot of criticism that it's not represented. Lots of equality and equal rights groups were involved in the creation of the SDGs. And really what the main catch-all that seems to, the best way to satisfy sort of the more conservative governments that we wanted to get on terms and on board with the SDGs, and the more progressive groups that wanted true representation for all people, was this term, leave no one behind. And that is the sort of tagline, the fundamental vision for the SDGs, is that no one gets left behind. So while there isn't an explicit reference to LGBTQI communities, they fall under this framework and this kind of catch-all of leave no one behind. So if you're going to achieve the SDGs, you have to recognize these communities and their specific concerns in order to leave no one behind. So I found this Bond is an organization in the UK that works on international development, and they had this interesting article that I looked up sort of about this issue and the fact where's the tension between the including everyone and representing them within the SDG framework and within the sustainable development sphere, and why are they maybe not mentioned as explicitly. And again, I want to mention that I am by no means an expert in this topic. Meredith and I are here to sort of expose you to the SDGs if you are not familiar with them yet, and sort of bring about some of that conversation. And if it is a framework that you would like to look into or like to use to look at all the different issues that affect the populations you're working with or the research that you're doing, we hope that these will be useful to you. But we did want to acknowledge that there's controversy around these, and that we wanted to be upfront about that. Mostly in the when I was taking a look at these issues, the most explicit references I found to the LGBTQI community with regard to the SDGs tended to be a lot about health and making sure that LGBTQI communities are getting adequate health care, that their health needs are being addressed, and that there's no discrimination in terms of healthcare. I found less literature and less research on other types of LGBTQI issues. But again, not an expert, so I'm sure there's more out there. And I, if you know of anything, or I would encourage you to share it maybe in the Q&A box for your colleagues. So that's the framework that we're working in. That's what the SDGs and sustainable development are. This massive vision of what we could be in the future, and a framework for actually working towards the future we want. Was another tagline that you'll hear a lot. So who are we? The Sdg Academy. Meredith?
Yes, so we are here on behalf of the Sdg Academy, which is an initiative of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is a research and activism-based organization founded from the United Nations that operates as sort of a think tank in the space. It's run by Jeffrey Sachs, our president, and he's very active within the space of sustainable development at Columbia University, but also drawing those themes through from the UN to our office in Paris, our offices around the world. And SDSN, you might not have heard of them explicitly as SDSN, but they're the people that put out the SDG index that rates all of the performances for sustainable performance around the world, country to country, region to region, and also the happiness report, which ranks the global happiness top to bottom around the world. So one very specific thing to point out is that the UN is rather against ranking systems, and SDSN does do all of these kind of measurable, there's a lot of metrics that feed into it. It's a very scientific process for these rankings, but we are an organization born from the UN, but not strictly tied to the UN at this point. So the Sdg Academy itself, rather than the SDSN, is the flagship educational online initiative of SDSN. SDSN is comprised of more than 1,200 global universities working together to find solutions for the biggest challenges on Earth. These are experts collaborating in research and teaching and activism, etc. Us ourselves, the Sdg Academy, create and curate free, high-quality educational resources on sustainable development with help from experts around the world. So if you want to learn about economics, you go to the economics. We just had a course on work and employment for the future, working with experts around the world on machine learning, on what the economy is going to look like, what a post-COVID world can look like, working with representatives from all around the world to answer those kind of hard-hitting questions. So it's case-by-case examples like that, courses on early childhood development, focusing on early childhood development experts, psychologists, things like that. So it digs into what the core question is and then who can answer those questions best. So free, high quality educational resources on sustainable development developed with experts from around the world. And the audience to these resources is university students, academics, practitioners, policymakers, and interested members of the public. So in a formal sphere, you see the university, the students, the academics, the practitioners. There's ways that you can integrate these courses into trainings or into a classroom of a formalized education. But I'd say our biggest, I work a lot with the metrics and who works with our resources specifically. And the most exciting thing, it's about between age 30 and 40. I think our average learner is 35 and a half, is female, is educated with a bachelor's degree, but approaching a master's degree. Like the kind of person who mostly takes the courses is not necessarily your traditional student, which goes to show that the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are an agenda that has kind of superseded just formal education, and that there's this appetite for people to get out there and to get learning in your own time about how these resources, how these issues affect other spaces that are tertiary to your own interests. The Sdg Academy itself, if we go to the next slide, we just have a lot of that quality content that can be moved across different educational spaces there. So while it is designed for like almost a master's level student in higher education, it doesn't need to be formally integrated with any singular curriculum. You can just go and learn about these subjects for yourself as the interests suit you. So Shannon, if you'd like to move forward with the educational resources themselves, of course.
Sure. So I'd like to dive into a couple of the resources that we have, the primary platforms that we offer, and show you a little bit about what we can offer and help you navigate. And like we've said before, everything is free and available online. Our goal is to help educate people about these topics at scale. And so that's why the online platforms have been the most useful for us, is to reach, I think, Meredith, you do our metrics, we've reached about over 500,000 people, or 500,000 enrollments in our courses. A couple years ago, we launched what's called our Sdg Academy Library, which I'll show you in a minute, to sort of break down all the videos, the video lectures that are in our online courses and make them standalone resources. So you can watch a single video rather than take a whole course. So you can maybe incorporate some of these videos into homework assignments or trainings and workshops. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But the two main things we'd like to show you today are that Sdg Academy Library, which is our searchable content library of more than 1,200 videos, lectures, case studies, some recorded Q&A sessions or webinars on all of the different sustainable development topics that we've touched on, everything from the framework itself and understanding the SDGs and the UN system and how all of that works, to individual topics like global public health, human rights, climate change, all of those different topics that you can find different resources for learning and then teaching perhaps about those issues. And those are with our global faculty and all of the experts that we work with. And then of course we have the massive open online courses, if you know the term MOOC, that we've developed since 2014 when we were first launched. So at this point, I think we have 32 MOOCs available. They're all on edx.org, which is one of the world's largest online learning platforms. Last time I checked, they had over 24 million registered users on their platform, and they were co-founded by Harvard and MIT, and they have a couple dozen major partners who create and offer free online education on everything. A lot of their most popular courses are very skills-based. They're like data analytics or very, very career-oriented and skills-based. But actually, we found during COVID, their most popular courses, as soon as everyone went into lockdown, were all of their philosophy courses on religion and philosophy. So sort of overall, edX kind of shows what are people concerned about at the time that they're signing up for these free courses. So it's really to maximize access to any kind of education, primarily at that university level. So the Sdg Academy Library, like I said, is our searchable content library. And if you will bear with me just a moment, I'd like to share my screen and give you a little demonstration here. Can you all see the library? Does that look good? All right. So this is our Sdg Academy Library. You'll see we've got sort of our highlighted videos on the front here. But basically, I just want to show you quickly how to search for anything that you need if there's a specific topic, or if you're interested in speaking or learning about a topic in a specific region. We've organized, most of these videos come from our online courses themselves. Oh, where did we go? There we go. So we have everything organized by our courses. So if you're interested in viewing videos from a specific course, but you don't want to enroll in the course, or maybe you did enroll in the course and you just want to watch a video again, you can kind of see everything organized by which course it comes from. We've recently started curating material in Spanish and hopefully would like to do more in additional languages as well. So we do have that option. By lecture, if there's a specific expert you'd like to hear from, we have them all listed here. If you like the SDG framework, if you want to see material curated according to which SDG is it most relevant to, you can do that. And then what we find is maybe more useful for teachers and researchers is curating by subject. It's by no means comprehensive, but we've kind of identified a couple of the core themes or disciplines that our topics tend to fall into. So migration studies, human rights, gender studies, history, policy of various sorts, education itself, education policy, the role of higher education and what higher education can do to further the Sustainable Development Agenda, all of those things. So say, for instance, you wanted to dive into SDG 5 gender equality. So I'll just come here. So it just brings up everything that's been tagged according to that. I should also mention that you can search by keyword up here, and that'll take you, it searches through the title of the video, the transcript of the video, the description to find that keyword. So that's great if you're looking for a specific topic that doesn't fall under the categories, or if you're interested in, say, learning about a specific document that may be referenced, or a specific organization, or you want to look at something by regions. Say you really want to see, do we have any case studies that take place in Rwanda or in the UK or something like that, and you really want to see something geographically specific. But so here we are for everything for SDG 5 looking at gender equality. And these are all of the videos that we have that deal with that. And many of these come from our course on human rights, which examines the human rights framework, talks about what it is, where did it come from, what does it try to address, what are the sort of the pros and cons of having human rights, what does rights mean, and then what is the future of the human rights agenda. So for instance, this video here on the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is a UN treaty, a UN convention. I'd actually like to show you this video so you can take a little bit of a look at how our videos are structured. All of our courses are different. All of our experts approach things in a little bit of a different way, but just so you can get a sense of the types of conversations our videos have. And I can also show you here, almost every video has an English language transcript. If you have students who are native speakers of other languages or want to check out other languages, many of them also have other languages available. You can download the video for offline viewing, and then also share or embed. So if you're working with a learning management system of some sort, all of that is available to you as well. But if you'll bear with me, I'd like to share with you this video. Let me know if you have trouble with this.
The Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women came into effect in 1979, but is the culmination of a process from the 1940s by the UN Commission on the Status of Women. It's been ratified to date by 184 out of the 197 countries. These include countries we might expect not to ratify a convention around discrimination against women, such as Iran, for example, but also countries we might expect to eliminate discrimination against women, such as the USA, who have not ratified the treaty. Some people suggest it's because the national laws are good enough and we don't need international treaties. That, of course, calls into question all the international frameworks that we have today. Other people suggest it's because it's too radical feminist in its approach. However, that calls into question why so many countries across the world have actually ratified. Other criticisms is that it undermines family values, and the question then is, does it really? The Convention has 14 articles, and Article 3 says, all states should take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to ensure the full development and advancement of women, for the purpose of guaranteeing them the exercise and enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms on a basis of equality with men. So the idea of the Convention is to put into place legislation on the one hand.
The Convention is of paramount importance to securing gender equality and combating gender-based discrimination. We urge all states who have not yet done so to become parties to the Convention, and we recall the obligation of states parties to implement the provisions of the Convention.
All countries, once they ratify, have to report every 4 years to a committee. The committee is made up of 20+ experts who are nominated by governments. It asks further questions around that report and asks also representatives of the state to attend a meeting to respond to their questions around the report. One of the issues raised by this is, of course, countries then are self-reporting, and countries tend to play up what they've achieved and play down what they haven't achieved. This has led to the notion of shadow reporting, and NGOs, women's movements and women's groups produced a shadow report to try and make sure that what is said is actually the case. Of course, The committee makes recommendations and states should act on them, but many do not do so. Around legislation, for example, often what happens is legislation might be on the books but not being enacted. So it calls into question what teeth the convention actually has. Now, when we think about the statement I read out from Article 3, first word was legislation I put pressure on, the second word was women. Now, this in itself causes an issue for some feminists and some gender activists, because what it's doing is putting the onus just on women. The problem we have with this, it constructs a world of binaries, man, woman. Many people have different gendered or sexual identities, and they're not reflected within the convention. The only real biological difference between men and women is that women give birth and men don't. Other differences are based on social constructions of what it means to be a man and a woman, gender roles and relations. This convention focuses on women, not on gender roles and relations. Importantly also, it mentions the freedoms on the basis of equality with men. Now, this has drawn further criticisms because this is very much the idea of looking at women to become like men rather than transformative change around gender roles and relations. The other problem with the idea of women as a category is that it doesn't allow for differences between women. It constructs women as a homogeneous group. But my sole identity is not just woman. Age, ethnicity, differing abilities, sexualities all enter into who I am. The notion of intersectionality. What the convention promotes is human rights, which is of course important, but which rights are we talking about? It's very, very strong on reproductive rights, and that's a very good thing. However, it's less strong on sexual rights, and in particular different sexual identities. The notion of heteronormativity is this idea that we construct or we privilege heterosexual relationships over all others. And if we focus on reproductive rights and maternity, which is a strong focus within the document also, then we're constructing all women as mothers, and we're suggesting that all women and all men are living in heterosexual relationships, which clearly isn't the case. It invisibilizes other types of relationships and other sexual identities. It is a broad convention, and economic rights are included in terms of employment, in terms of credit. Also, harmful practices are included, so for example, trafficking of women and prostitution. What's interesting about this is that prostitution is constructed then as exploitative in all cases. It's not discussed within the employment category, nor does it indeed recognise transactional sex, which is a norm for a large number of women across the world. So what we have is a very good basis, but there are issues with the convention and the idea that in the end, how powerful is the convention? We know that the US hasn't ratified it, in part because some people argue it's powerful. However, we also know that other countries have ratified it, and those countries continue to violate women's rights. So at the end of the day, it's a good example once again that a declaration is a start, a first rung on the ladder, but it's only a start. And a declaration can only do so much to bring about rights, respect, and dignity.
So that was a video from our course on human rights, human wrongs, that is led by two lead faculty, two instructors from the Middlesex University in London. And so you just heard from there is the head of the law school at Middlesex University, Sarah Bradshaw. And thank you for watching with us. I wanted to show you that just as an example of some of the approaches that are taken to our videos, the quality of them, and maybe get you thinking a little bit about how you would want to use them in teaching or workshops, how you might want to respond to them if you have criticisms of the subjects being discussed, how you might want to use them to play off of for a discussion, and we'll go into some of those examples in a minute. So that is our Sdg Academy Library in a nutshell. Beyond that, sorry, I have way too many tabs open right now. Please bear with me. We have our courses themselves, and those are our free online courses on edx.org. So let me switch over to there. So this is our edX page where you can find all of the courses that we currently have available. It is anything on edX is an X, so we are Sdg Academy X on edX, and I can share some of the links in the chat in a minute. But here you can find all the courses that we have available and find ones that are of interest to you and that you want to either learn more about or maybe find out what kind of resources we have that you can then share with others. So since we're talking about the human rights course, I can just show you a little bit inside that course. So this is if you clicked and enrolled in our course on human rights, this is what it would look like. All of the courses are free, but you have the option to upgrade to get a certificate if that's something that's important to you. That does come at a cost. Edx itself offers financial aid if that's something that is interesting, but you are not able to afford the upgrade cost right now. But otherwise, you're free to access pretty much everything just as an audit learner is what they call it. So you can watch the videos, take the practice quizzes, participate in all the discussions, and download and read the readings. So this is the sort of the framework of how the course is organized. And I want to take a little look here, again, gendered rights and violence, the subject sort of that we're addressing today. So you would come in here, you click that, and then these are all of the videos. Every course is organized a little bit differently. So this course has the videos that we've just looked at. They organize the reading material by with individual videos. Other courses maybe just have a big block at the end of every module that says here are all the readings for the module, both required readings and then maybe suggested additional resources if you're interested into learning more. Our courses generally have these comprehension questions, so you can test your understanding of the material. And then many of our courses have various activities, either discussion-based activities or activities that encourage you to play with a tool or look more deeply into an issue, to explore and reflect on your understanding of what you've been learning. So I'm just trying to get there. Sorry, I'm having trouble with Zoom right now. Yes. So this is just an example of the kind of activity. Again, this is from this course on human rights, which uses a video from a Nicaraguan soap opera that students are asked to watch and then respond to, looking at using media and maybe less conventional methods, communication strategies to bring about social change. And that's partially because Sarah Bradshaw, who you just heard from, her particular area of expertise is gendered rights in Latin America. So that's one thing that she brought to this course, is this global perspective and what's going on there. So this is actually a new version of the course that's going to launch in a couple of days. So there's no existing discussions right now. But if we looked at the one that's currently going on, then that will end in a minute. At the end of this week, actually, I guess, there'll be students from all around the world engaging in discussions about their response to this video and to the prompt that we've had here. So thank you for bearing with me through our trip through all of our resources. Now we want to talk a little bit about brainstorming some ideas for how we think these resources could be helpful for you in any educational activities, teaching, learning, trainings you might run, workshops, and how we suggest that you might want to use these. So Meredith?
Absolutely. So there were a few questions coming through as you were talking, Shannon. So just to kind of sum up some of those points, Mo, you've asked some very good points that I think we'll save for the next Q&A that we're having. But we can share some links as we go through. I've already shared the edX link to the Sdg Academy X page. We also have, which is an attachment, so we would need to talk to the coordinators about sending afterwards, but we do have a kind of live catalog of available courses like you would see for enrolling in any sort of like SUNY-based courses. You'd have your course catalog where you could read about it, see the description, see who's lecturing on those courses, etc. So there's a few resources that can be shared. So if that is something that interests you, either reach out to us afterwards or we can try to provide materials afterwards as well. Also, as Shannon said, with the courses launching September 1st now, this is really just such a wonderful time to be getting involved with the content for the next iteration. One of the courses that I manage on climate change science and impact has a small update for the 2020 context, things like that, where we've been running some of these courses for a while now, and it's great to see how the conversation and the content of the courses themselves have really begun to mature. So this is a great time to start getting involved with these resources, so to say. So just moving to the next slide here, just as far as how the resources.
Something real quick. I think I forgot to mention our courses are what's called self-paced, which means that once they're open, they're available. We leave them open for a year, and then we rerun them immediately. Just closing them and then opening them again gives us a chance to make any changes or updates. But once they're open, you can enroll at any time. You can take a full year to complete it if you want to take that much time. So there's no specific rush. I mean, there is a rush. We'd like you to enroll. We'd love to have you at, part of our learner base, but that's just to clarify sort of the timeline for this. Sorry, Meredith, please go on.
No, that's right. There's a rush to engage because we like the dialogue to be good, and we like there to be a lot of seasoned debate and things like that in the discussion boards, but there's not pressure to finish. It's different than your traditional classroom in that sense. So thanks for pointing that out. I used to lecture on sustainable development and CSR. So I really think that there's a lot of powerful ways that these resources can be used in flipped classrooms and blended learning and a number of formal ways. But as far as getting the message out there and getting individuals empowered to understand these issues a bit more, we just have a few ideas for how they can be shared, either in formal education, in non-formal education, or in trainings and developments, or lifelong learning. So a few ideas that we have here is to have students watch the videos before class or before a meeting to inspire discussion, to have open conversations on a message board or in a live classroom, just to kind of spark the debate, because there's not much about sustainable development that isn't controversial. So you might agree with something to a certain point, but that point might be why it's not getting done. So let's have open and honest dialogues about what these issues are. Use SDG Academy videos to introduce topics. Then use your lessons to delve deeper, debate, or present these alternative perspectives. Again, it's about advancing the conversation here. Enroll yourself in an SDG Academy MOOC, borrow quiz questions, readings, interactive activities, ideas, etc. All of our resources are free, so if you want to knock them off and put them in your own context in a way that makes sense and a way that the message is being shared, that's really the bottom line. And have students enroll directly in SDG Academy MOOCs on edX, share across your network, watch some videos on the library like Shannon was showing you. There's just a great number of things that can be done in order to get this content shared across a number of different platforms. There's a number of ways that you can move beyond these kind of strictly classroom-based resources too, but that would all be kind of up to your what courses you value, what your personal values are. If you think that you just really want to learn more about the SDGs after today's discussion, we have the Age of Sustainable Development, we have Measuring the SDGs, we have a lot of baseline introductory courses. But if you feel like the framework's the framework, but what I care about is climate justice, then go ahead and enroll in one of the many environmentally driven courses. If you feel that your heart is with all of the social issues, then there's so many discussions that speak to that. There's also hybrid courses that speak to both. I mean, environmental security and sustaining peace. Next week, we have a course launching on the governance of transboundary freshwater security. So you can see how all of these big issues come together, and there's so much to be discussed and so much to be debated across each of these avenues for thought. So again, just to have the conversations. Next, Shannon.
Yeah. So finally, we want to highlight some resources that we have at SDSN. So sort of within our parent organization, that if you are a student or you teach students or you know students at the university level who are, or young adults who are interested in getting involved in these issues, we have a group called SDSN Youth. And so that's our youth network. And so they have their own network sort of parallel to the SDSN membership of institutions. They have their own network of thousands of young people from around the world, and they run 4 major programs, 3 of which are really for the older set, so college students and above. They have the Youth Solutions Report, which is an annual report that gives young innovators a chance to showcase their game-changing projects that they've developed to help achieve the SDGs. They submit them to this report. If they're selected, they're showcased in the report, and then they have opportunities to draw interest from potential donors and other types of supporters, either globally or within their own region where they're working. They have the Local Pathways Fellowship, which is a fellowship program that's designed to provide young leaders around the world with tools and a platform and a framework for taking action on city and community level issues. So urban development and community development is a big focus of the SDGs, specifically SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. But this fellowship program gives these young actors opportunities to connect with different urban development experts and practitioners to help them develop their own work in their cities or their towns to support sustainable development where they live. And then they have this new initiative called the Sdg Students Program, which is basically like supporting the creation of SDG clubs on college campuses around the world. So these SDG student hubs, as they're called, university students can come together to learn about, discuss, and take action on the SDGs within their campus communities, within the wider community surrounding their university. They have SDG coordinators, which are sort of the students responsible for convening everything. And then you can have different members join and they get trainings, they get frameworks and action items that they can do to really drive the SDGs on their own in their campus environments. So I can share those links with you as well, but that's a great opportunity for any young people, or if you work with young people and you want to help get them involved, these are great opportunities for them to get engaged. Also on the topic of engagement, Meredith was discussing some ways to use our resources, and I realized we don't actually have anything in this presentation about one of our exciting new initiatives, which is a community of practice. We've invited universities, NGOs, social enterprises, any organization basically that is working on these issues who wants access to resources and peer exchange with other organizations that are working on these issues to help educate. So specifically helping in the education around these issues, whether it's formal education like a university classroom setting, whether it's trainings, workshops, staff trainings for your own staff. We've developed this community of practice that will bring together all of these different constituencies and all these different stakeholders. And we're really, so it's sort of in the pilot phase right now, but what we're really envisioning is this very diverse group of people all kind of working on different issues, coming from different backgrounds, working in different geographies, but trading their experience. And especially as so many people are moving online and figuring out, how do I do my work and how do I do these trainings, but do them in an online environment, get advice from each other and from us on how to use our resources that we've presented today, what other resources are out there that people are using, what types of pedagogical frameworks, what types of tools are people using to really get this education across to people and make sure that people have access to the materials that they need. So I'm just going to drop that link in the chat here if you're interested. And now I know we've thrown a lot of information at everyone, and I thank you all for your time. I think we want to take a couple minutes here to stop and answer some more questions if there's anything coming through. Morgan, is there anything that we can help answer?
I'm not seeing any technical questions other than people asking about how they can access resources.
Well, that's good. Hopefully we've answered questions. If you do have any, please don't be shy. We'll answer whatever we can.
There was just one question. I don't know if you wanted to answer it later, if you want to answer it now. When you speak about the experts who you collaborate with for the Academy, what constitutes an expert and what type of experts do you work with? That's
a very relevant question. So we tend to work with a mix of, we like to have all of our courses kind of grounded in an academic framework so that there is kind of that critical inquiry into the topic. So we work with a lot of university professors around the world or researchers that are doing work in this area that have an academic background in the subject that they're teaching, and also in that case have experience teaching and formulating a curriculum around the topic. So our work as education managers is to help with that pedagogical element and figure out also how do we translate that into an online environment for thousands of people. But we like our faculty, particularly the lead faculty in our courses, most of them have an academic background in the subject that they're teaching, and they have experience teaching. But we also involve a lot of people from the civil society and the UN system. So we have faculty members in our courses who are coming from different UN agencies, are coming from different NGOs, coming from the World Bank or the World Health Organization, that are bringing their sort of either their like think tank experience, if that's what they are, or their sort of global governance experience, and can really explain from the inside what is, what does it mean with the, UNESCO's framework on education for sustainable development. What is it and what does it mean? And speaking as an insider. Some of our courses also involve people from the private sector. So there's a large group of organizations and companies that are working to support sustainable development practices in the private sector, in businesses. So some of our courses have representation from there as well. And then practitioners, people who are in the field doing the work with the communities. That's something we're hoping to get more of in as well, is little spotlight series or sort of shorter case study videos that really showcase work that's going on the ground at the grassroots level in all of the different topics. So I hope that kind of gives you a look at sort of the range of people that we've been speaking with for our courses.
I can see another question in there about the cost of the courses, Shannon, which I know you touched on a bit before, but the audit track learning is consistently free across the board. But there are verified tracks if you'd like to speak to that.
Sure. So like I said, the audit track is free. Edx courses, the learning is free. The video lectures that we looked at, the kind of comprehension level quiz questions, all of the discussion posts, all of the readings, everything is designed to be accessible for free. And especially if you have inconsistent access to internet, we try to make everything that's essential downloadable as well, so that is available to as many people as possible around the world. Edx also offers a certificate track. So if you're interested in getting an Edx Verified Certificate is what they call it, then there is a fee attached to that, and that allows you to access certain graded elements. So maybe, on the audit track, you can take all of the general sort of knowledge comprehension level quizzes. And then if you upgrade to the verified track, you get to take the final exam. And then it's your grade on the final exam that determines whether or not you've earned a certificate. Most of our courses are priced at $49 to have that opportunity to upgrade and earn the certificate. We have a couple shorter courses that are $25. And again, we recognize that that's not possible for everyone. So edX itself offers financial aid. So they have an application system that you can apply to receive discounts or even free access to the verified track. And then the library as well, the video library, all of that is available for free. Through our community of practice, we offer a couple different options to use the library. So, if you wanted to make your own playlists, if you wanted to sort of if you don't have, for instance, your own learning management system, but you want a place to store videos on these topics and create playlists that you can share with other people of our videos. Those are some of the functionalities that we open up to members of our community of practice to use the library, but just searching through, downloading, viewing, sharing links, all of that is available for free on our library.
And I see that there's just one question left in the Q&A. So if we could just go ahead and answer that now rather than waiting till the later segment, but just about how a lot of minorities, the Black, Indigenous, people of color populations, how the environmental sustainability and the development work is influencing both those communities and being influenced by those communities. I'd be happy to take it. And then Shannon, if you'd like to jump in afterwards. But one thing that, we've driven home really how interdisciplinary this narrative is, but there's such a movement that's equally driven in the mainstream of the SDGs about the need for global understanding and global capacities, but local impact and local action. And that is just everything for the SDGs, because you're not going to go out in the world and influence all of the US in one foul swoop, or all of North America, or whatever your local context is. So things like those major hard-hitting questions really are first answered in the localized context. And then those kind of, whether it's a statement or whether it's an initiative or whether it's a movement really that grows from there, becomes scaled up in a lot of cases. So unfortunately, there's not one definite answer at the global scale for the question that was being asked, but there is good work being done in the environmental justice movement. And a lot of that comes out of the US's EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, just in our own localized context. That works to answer a lot of specific questions around how minorities are impacted by air pollution, landfills, lead poisoning, things that are specific to like the North American minority communities that you would see here. Those are very different from the priorities of some other countries and some other agencies working to answer those in their own localized contexts. But that is something to bear in mind, just the locality versus the glocality. Do you have anything to add, Shannon? Sorry.
Just to go back again to the point I made about the LGBTQI inclusion in the SDG framework, I'd say there's probably better representation for racial and ethnic minorities or indigenous communities than there is for the sexual and gender communities. However, again, everyone falls under that leave no one behind banner. And so the spirit of the SDGs is that everyone is included, everyone's needs are met, everyone's concerns are addressed. One thing that comes up time and time again when it comes to understanding how different constituencies and different communities affect and are affected by different SDG issues is the availability of data and disaggregated data that's disaggregated by gender identity and sexual orientation, data that's disaggregated by different minority statuses, by indigenous status, by race and ethnicity, because that's the only, having that data is the only way that we know if certain communities are being left behind, if they're not being represented by the mainstream data that's being presented. So finding ways to make sure people are counted. We've been hearing in the US a lot about the census and how important it is to be counted on the census. This is why. It's so that we know who's here and how they're being treated. And does it break down in any particular way that we may or may not be aware of. So I would say that that's sort of the thing that comes up again and again when you're talking about the needs of different populations, is make sure that those populations are being represented in the data. And actually, sorry, there's a noise outside. SDSN, our parent organization, recently partnered with National Geographic and Esri, which is a spatial mapping company, to create something called SDGs Today. And one of the challenges with data for the SDGs is that census data is only gathered once every 10 years. A lot of other data is not gathered very often, or it takes, if it's going through really official channels, the data might be gathered, but it takes forever to validate and to assess. And so by the time the data gets to the official reporting systems at the national statistical offices in national governments and all the way up through the UN, where it's reported as, okay, this is how we're doing on gender equality, this is how we're doing on access to healthcare. By the time it gets there, it's very out of date. So one of the big needs for SDG measurement is real-time data that is relevant and verified, but also comes a lot faster. So our colleagues at SDSN put together this thing called SDGs Today, which I just put in the chat. That is, I think it's still growing, but it's a way of looking at different data points related to different SDG targets. So if you look at the website, you'll see there are little data cards, and each one represents a different SDG. And there could be, one or more specific SDG targets that have data associated with them. So I know, for instance, the data card for SDG 11, which is the goal on sustainable cities and communities, is looking at air quality and pollution. And so they get their data from the air quality index, which is updated daily about what is the air quality in different places around the world. Excuse me. And you can see a map there that shows you different, what the air quality is in different places around the world. And so it's just to make sure that researchers and policymakers and students and anyone who is looking to see how different people or different actors are performing on the different SDGs have access to the most up-to-date data that they can and can visualize it. Because it's, not everyone, especially policymakers who are busy and aren't necessarily trained in data analysis, can see it and understand it really quickly. So that's a cool resource that was just developed that helps kind of visualize how everyone's doing. I'm sorry, that was a really long answer, but I hope that helped give some context to these issues and the representation inside them.
And just being mindful of the time, I know we do need to move along to the discussion, but a question came in that's not unrelated to that, Shannon. So Sydney Saylor has asked, are there any of the materials available about the SDGs for K through 8 students?
Yes,
it's not there, but this is your wheelhouse and it does relate to that last resource. So we'll tie this up and then we'll go to the discussion if that's all right with everyone.
So I mentioned about 3 of the programs that are run by our colleagues at SDSN Youth, and the 3 programs that I highlighted are specifically for what we call young adult, young youth, young people, and that's 18 to 30 is actually, I think, how the UN itself defines youth. But they also have a 4th program called the Global Schools Program that I'm going to put right here. And so that's a program that's looking more at K through 12 education and embedding all of these topics and an understanding of these topics into a K through 12 curriculum. So they've been working with education ministries they just did a pilot in, I think it was Ghana, Turkey, and Morocco. So working with researchers there to help figure out how are these topics being represented in current K through 12 curriculum, and then what are the next stages to think about, okay, how do we embed more of these topics? How do we find ways? Because we've been saying over and over again that these are interdisciplinary topics. You don't need a class on the SDGs. We don't need to put more pressure on teachers to add more subjects that they have to teach. All of these things are already being represented. How do we make sure that the SDGs are kind of, and the values of the SDGs, the thinking about the future, the thinking about sustainable practices at the personal level, at and all the way up through the global level, can really be represented throughout the educational cycle. So all the way from like pre-K to lifelong learning after you've graduated college and so forth. So the Global Schools Program has resources there for teachers that has some lesson plans if you want to learn to teach the SDGs, and they've been doing a lot of the research work. And overall, we're looking to launch something called Mission 4.7. So SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4, is education. Looking at different ways to bring about quality education, equitable access to quality education. Target 7 of SDG 4 is specifically on access to education for sustainable development. So that's talking more about the subject matter that's being taught, less than the access to education itself, and making sure that the values of sustainable development and global citizenship, understanding that we're all connected, understanding that there's an interdependence of all of us around the world, and that we need to understand each other and we need to understand how we're all connected, that is represented in learning across the board. So the Academy and SDSN is looking to launch something called Mission 4.7, which would really be a task force to drive home these values in education from the top level. So speaking with government ministers around the world and making sure that's being reflected, or how is the best way to help transform education policy. So that's sort of another avenue there. But yes, we are running out of time, so I will bring us back here.
Perfect. So just to move from the Q&A into the discussion, and then we'll have a more of a summary Q&A should time allow at the end. So please continue to send your questions. But in the spirit of the discussion, if you go to the next slide there, we just want to, what we're advocating here today is that these tools exist, and these tools exist to infuse your own understanding. So it would be very disingenuous of us to walk away from this conversation without having orchestrated some sort of conversation on it. So you're all here because you have that innate consciousness towards these topics, towards the social dimensions, towards the environmental dimensions, whatever it is that your personal alignment to sustainable development is, as it falls along your own value chain. So as activists in your own space, your thought leaders, and you are examples for others. So considering your present context, whether it's the context of this conference, whether it's the context of your classroom, your club, your society, whatever it is, excuse me, just to exercise your voice in a number of different areas. So we've proposed, I think, 3 questions on the following slide. Yes, minimize the chat that I have blocking some of these off. So yes, based on your own understanding of sustainable development, How do you see the SDG framework aligning to your own work combating sexual and interpersonal violence against the LGBTQI+ community? In your experience, how are these topics currently being taught? That's in formal education, but how have you experienced them in your own educational settings through informal or non-formal engagement on campuses, around your community, etc.? How might the Sdg Academy educational resources and the concepts of sustainable development in general be useful in your teaching and learning activities, both as an activist, as a student, etc.? So these are broad and wide-ranging subject matters. So maybe if we just focus in on whatever issue speaks most to you as you go through to start a discussion. So what we would like to do is, if you do have any experiences or any points on this that you would like to share, either by raising your hand or by dropping a note in the Q&A, and we can move from there with the moderators.
It's raining here. I can hear. If you don't have anything to say right now, that's perfectly fine. We hope that you can sort of sit with these questions for a little bit and think about how they might inform your work or not. Again, we just want to make these resources available to any of you out there who might be looking for more teaching material or more learning material for yourself or for others. Mm-hmm. But we wanted, like Meredith said, to give you an opportunity to talk and to ask more questions or present your own perspectives, mm-hmm. And maybe hear from some of your colleagues on the call as well.
Until we get people raising their hand, one experience related to this that we've had a bit recently, we have interns from a liberal arts college that have been joining us for the summer. And as they've gone through the process of engaging with the Sdg Academy resources, and as they've gone through the process of transitioning back to this online education system that they'll be using for the future, just a lot of thought on how the future of the classroom will be a lot different, and there's going to be so much like explicit educational reform in order to make these resources, or in order to make all resources available and accessible. So in the struggle to make things accessible, how are we still continuing to embed critical thinking along the journey? So that's really the spirit to which these discussion questions are trying to speak, that you continue to inform yourself with these questions, despite what the classroom might be looking like in the next year.
And I'm sure many people had to make the rapid switch to online learning as we all sheltered for COVID this past semester. So whether you wanted to or not, I'm sure you've developed at least some familiarity with online learning. But going into this next semester, and unfortunately, it's not entirely clear how long this will last, but I think it's also an opportunity to rethink how you present information, how you use online resources, and maybe even when we go back to more traditional classroom settings, if you can use sort of a blended learning environment where there's engagement with and reliance on online resources, and then does that free you up to do more discussions or more project-based learning because you're having the sort of the lecture experience through online learning, either resources that you find elsewhere like ours, or if you want to create your own. We are getting some Q&As. So Patrick Miller, your daughter is a sustainable development major at Columbia. We are actually partially connected to Columbia. SDSN, our parent organization, was originally part of the Earth Institute there in 2012 and then eventually spun off into its own independent NGO. So very glad to hear that. I hope she's enjoying it. And then we had one anonymous commenter here who says that that sustainable development, it's a good way to engage the community about either about sexual and interpersonal violence is because it fits into the SDG framework, and maybe that's a different demographic that you could tap into to be part of those discussions and say, my topic and the things that I care about are part of the sustainable development discussion. And quite frankly, at least in my personal experience, when I look at a lot of discussions about sustainable development. I see a lot of attention on the environmental issues because, I mean, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, pollution, all of those things are very real and are being talked about a lot. I see a lot of attention on the economic side of things, the fact that there's rampant inequality, and that we have to provide more services and more safety nets, and more opportunity for more people. And a lot of times I see the social elements getting rolled into those two things. So they're there, but they're not the focus of the conversation. And I think that there's a lot of room to center, gender equity and sexual violence, and within those conversations, but then also as their own conversations under the sphere of social inclusion for all types of people, and make that a sustainable development conversation on its own and bring that into the conversation.
There's another anonymous comment here from a student. I had a professor in graduate school who was part of an alternative textbook initiative. We used online articles and videos instead of expensive textbooks, which is absolutely a great way forward, because it's also the narrative is a bit different than you might see in a large firm published textbook, and you're able to engage in a more powerful way with localized examples and things like that. Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, just in 2015, when the goals were launched themselves, there was a pretty large conversation there too around how the SDGs were kind of the changing doxa. I don't know how many people on the call are familiar with Purdusian frameworks, but just you can really talk about the SDGs in a number of different ways that add value to the sustainable development conversation, because it provides a formalized way of discussing environmental rights, human rights, and the impact on economy altogether there. But it's informed by your own habitus. So where you are coming from, your shared and lifelong experiences joining that. So the fact that you can have a focused conversation on something like the SDGs as the doxa, but bring all of these other folks in with the shared values that each of them has from their own background to inform the discussion, make it a very powerful tool beyond the classroom. Yes, go on, Shannon.
I was just going to bring up, and I just put in the chat, a UNESCO link. So it's certainly not a UNESCO movement, although they have some good resources on it, is this idea of the open movement. And in our case, we focus on open educational resources, but the idea that infrastructure and knowledge and information should be available, should be openly available. And so obviously there's tension there between, intellectual property and corporate enterprise, but that what can we make available to other people so that we can all grow together? So open science, and particularly any science or research that's been publicly funded, there's a very clear argument that should be available to anyone. That should be open. It shouldn't be behind a paywall. People should be able to access it and work from it. The development of open educational resources like ours, like many other platforms, actually Edx itself, the platform where we host our courses, they make their platform, or at least part of their software that they build their platform on, that's open software. They have something called Open Edx. So if you wanted to create your own MOOC platform for your own constituency or community, or even to build a business off of, you can use their open software and then build your model of whatever you need off of that. So there's this growing movement and growing awareness that having resources available to be used that are just open is useful for everyone and allows people to grow and do their own work, and just democratizes sort of access to a lot of information. Oh, Elizabeth says 2 folks raised their hands. We'd love to hear from you.
So it looks like we have Michaela Ridley. She has her hand raised. It looks like you're unmuted now, Michaela, if you want to go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I apologize. I just thought it's not like fully articulated. It was just kind of what came to me when I was seeing these questions, and especially when I think of how have I experienced these kind of issues in an education setting. I think one of the big things that I notice is a lot of times when issues like this, whether it's policies or in the classroom, when issues like this come up, there tends to be this drive to talk about the issue without stepping on the toes of anybody who doesn't want to talk about the issue. I like the big example that comes to my mind is a lot of universities have been moving towards like gender neutral housing, and things like that. And for some reason, I see this very strong pattern of a lot of universities are like, yeah, we have gender neutral housing and we did it for the LGBTQ community, but not really. We did it to make them think we did it for them, but we actually are gonna, like, everything on our website, everything about our policy is gonna make it seem like this is just kind of a practical solution. We're gonna try and make it as not political as possible. So it kind of prevents progress in a lot of ways, because it's like sometimes it feels like rather than trying to solve a problem, a university is trying to solve enough of a problem that the group that's being underrepresented stops talking about it. I'm not sure if that.
No, absolutely.
So I'm hoping that was articulated well enough.
No, I think I definitely understand where you're coming from here. It's something similar that we see in the UN system, or you might have heard the term greenwashing, which is to make something seem more environmentally friendly than it actually is. We also see what we call blue washing, which is to say policies or actions that are supposed to make you seem like you're totally in line with the SDGs and you're totally in line with the UN agenda, but like it's just enough to make you look good, but not enough to actually solve the problem. So I don't know what the appropriate term would be for making something sound more LGBT friendly than it really is. We call that rainbow washing. I don't know. But I think actually the SDGs are kind of an opportunity to step up that conversation and just a suggestion. And I'd be curious to hear what people think about this in sort of a real situation. But that there is a big push to get the university sector more involved. They have so much potential to be really drivers of change in these, for all of these issues, because they teach and they prepare the next generation to be leaders and actors in the world and to bring us into the future that we want. They are employers. They have infrastructure that could be more sustainable. They do research and publish papers. So there are so many ways that a university can be a force for good for the SDGs. And maybe there's an opportunity there to say, if you're going to do gender neutral housing, like you want to use that to make yourself feel better, use it to show that you are supporting access to safe places for the LGBT community, because that actually does adhere to the SDGs. I don't know. I'm also not being super articulate right now, so I apologize for that. But
No. I know that we have other questions to move to, but I would like to respond to your question or your statement really as well. It's a shame that it is such a relatable question, such a relatable kind of concern across the board, and you can see it in classrooms, in universities, in businesses, in every sort of way, the way that people report upon their social consciousness, which is just maybe we provided enough healthcare, which should be a minimum human right rather than something that's been provided. So there's issues like that across the board that the SDGs hardly touch on enough, really. Like the fact that there's this framework there that you can move forward with your conversation is quite excellent. But the shame, and something that can be really brought up to the leaders in your own network, is that if this is a university concern and things like that, universities are always striving to be thought leaders, to be research leaders, to be leaders in a space. And there is such an opportunity at this point in time in order to advance the conversations in a more meaningful way than just, we put a sticker on it and now it's good for everyone. Like that's not a solution, that's just a step that's not even in a notable direction. Like if there is an opportunity to be a thought leader and to be an action-based leader in this, then that's where a university can truly shine if they choose to prioritize it. So I encourage you to get involved and to push for those kind of things. I know there's other people raising their hand too. Sorry, Elizabeth, if you want to move forward.
It looks like Nina has their hand raised. If you're still on and you want to ask a question. Oh, I don't think they're unmuted yet though.
Nina, you are able to speak if you would like to. I also do see that there are some questions. There's another question in the Q&A that we may want to get to if, while we wait for Nina. Someone has asked, can you share a bit about the Teaching Respect for All curriculum? How has this tool been used by violence?
Oh, take that off. Unraise my hand. I don't know why my hand is raised.
Okay. I think that may have been unintentional. So we're just going to go ahead. Can you share a bit about the Teaching Respect for All curriculum and how that tool has been used by violence prevention specialists?
So I'm not familiar with that specifically. I know it's a UNESCO curriculum, UNESCO framework. So I can drop that into the chat here. So I'm actually not super familiar with that publication. It came out in, looks like 2014. So it actually would have preceded the SDGs as a formal framework. But again, though the SDGs were in discussion for 3 or 4 years before they were officially announced in 2015. So I wouldn't be surprised if this curriculum kind of, without referencing them specifically, obviously, because it precedes them, it brings about a lot of those issues and tries to contribute to that movement. So I am not super familiar with it, but if you want to take a look at it and report back, I'd be very curious to hear about it. And I'm sure you could look through it and Google and see what other organizations are using it and how they're using it.
I am going to hop back on. I know that there's still 1 or 2 more questions. If we want to just wrap up the last one, that's a bit of a comment. All right, so I think that just to be respectful of folks' times, and I really wanted to hop back on and thank the both of you so much for joining us today. I know that everyone is really crunched for time. So taking time out of your day to join all of us was just really, really meaningful. Thank you so much to my colleague Morgan for convening and moderating today's session. I'm just very much so appreciated to the 3 of you and to everyone who was able to join us for this session. I hope that you'll be able to come back at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our President's Panel and formal opening plenary. But I will let the 3 of you sort of close out. If folks want to get in contact with you or have any additional questions, I'll let you kind of share that information now. But if not, I will see everyone at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for listening to our presentation. I shared a lot of links in the chat, but if there's anything that we didn't share or that you didn't get a chance to grab and you want to have access to it, please reach out to Elizabeth and Morgan and we can make sure that we get those resources to you. I also had this slide up for a minute, different ways to get in touch with us, find us, engage with us. If you can subscribe to our mailing list. If you go to our website there, sdgacademy.org, there'll be a button for that. Learn a little bit more about how to get involved with us and with other teams within the SDSN. So thank you again for having us, Meredith.
No, thank you very much. We know that we've given all of this information in these tools, so you might run off and use all of them, use none of them, whatever it is. We might not necessarily be able to close the loop again. So if there is anything, the SDG Academy at unsdsn.org would be the most straightforward way to reach out to the Academy. And we can, again, take those conversations forward. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.